Hi, everybody. Hello, good afternoon, everybody in Denmark. My name is Adam, and Kevin invited me to give you a short presentation for your symposium. I understand this is a group of experienced psychonauts and facilitators and all sorts of different people who are part of the Danish psychedelic scene, who are more or less, experienced and well versed in psychedelia, which is great. So thank you, Kevin, for inviting me, and thank you, all of you, for having me. I want to apologize that I cannot do this live. This is a recording. At the same time, more or less, that you guys are watching this, I am actually giving another presentation in a panel at the university in Mexico. So the time frame was a little bit complicated, but I'm happy to record this so we can at least have some of this content passing through the screen. And what I want to talk about today is pretty straightforward. It relates more or less to the set and setting, right? Which is a concept that I'm sure all of you already have learned and thought about quite a lot, whether you're a psychonaut or a facilitator or maybe a therapist or an integration coach or all sorts of different roles within this ecosystem of psychonautica. The set and setting is something that is very much, well known, and something we talk about quite a lot. The internal state of the participant or the experiencer before we go into the experience, and then the setting, which is the context, right? Oftentimes we relate to the physical space, the social component of it, so on and so forth. So I'm not gonna take too much time to talk about that, but rather just about a very specific aspect of the set and setting, which is what I call the narrative dimension of the set and setting, or sometimes a discursive from discourse dimension of the set and setting, which relates more or less to what are the ideas about what psychedelics are, what psychedelics are for, how can they be used, and for what ends. What are the things that we expect to get from the experiences that we do with psychedelics, and all sorts of different attributes that relate to the stories that we tell about what these things are and what they are for, and what are the dominant narratives that are oftentimes passed, right? And you can think, for example, about I don't know, ayahuasca retreat, right? And then you go to the website of that ayahuasca retreat, and what are the things that they're gonna tell you about what ayahuasca is, right? Because it's not gonna be, when you arrive to that retreat, you're not gonna arrive there in a conceptual vacuum, right? You're already gonna have a pretty good idea what it is that because you read the website, you receive the communications and the emails from that website, right? Like you have an idea of what is the orientation of at least what it is that this particular center or this particular facilitator thinks ayahuasca is and what it is for, and why he is trying to get you to join his retreat or his circle, whatever, is because there's something out there that is selling you, right? But first and foremost, there's a narrative that is perpetuating about what ayahuasca is, and these things change a lot, right? These are not very homogeneous. I mean, there's some narratives that are more dominant throughout different times, right? But there's still kind of like a relative wide um variety of different things that people think about what psychedelics are for, right? I mean, it's not the same thing, for example, and again, there's different substances. I mean, it's not the same thing to talk about MDMA or LSD or ayahuasca. There's people have different ideas of what these things are for. It's not the same thing for, say, hey, like we're gonna do MDMA and ketamine and LSD in a rave because we wanna maximize fun and just go and, like dance in the dance floor for 12 hours and just have this radical experience of community and togetherness and joy and fun. It's not the same as saying like, oh, well, I'm gonna go on this ayahuasca retreat in the Amazon because I wanna like really work on myself and work through my childhood trauma and like really go deep into all of these things that are gonna make me into a better person. I mean, we already have two radical things that, yes, they're very much substance dependent, but they're also very much just different stories that we say about what this is for versus what this is for, and these things change all the time, right? Like the same thing that we say about ayahuasca in the context of the retreat, like I'm going to go through the trauma, and I mean the same things we could say for an LSD experience or an MDMA experience or even a therapeutic ketamine experience. So it's not so much the substance, but rather the orientation of the person, um, that is more or less responding to certain stories that more or less resonate with what he wants or what he seeks out of these experiences. So that's kind of like a messy introduction. Actually, I'm going to move on to just I'm gonna share, I guess, some memes. I don't know if you guys have been or seen the Instagram page that is Healing from Healing. This is this is an Instagram page that I made maybe 3 years ago as a way to kind of like talk about some of the difficult conversations within the healing, something that I call healing culture. Yeah, I mean, psychedelics are a part of healing culture, but not the whole of healing culture. Healing culture is kind of like a bigger umbrella term that includes within it all sorts of different cultures, subcultures, streams of influence that include within it, of course, psychonautics, psychedelia, transformational festivals, and all the different things that we consider to be part of the psychedelic scene, but also other things that are, relevant, tangential, or in other ways, part of the bigger culture, which is the healing culture, what I call healing culture. I mean, right? It's the streams of influence that relate to psychedelia, the streams of influence that relate to, new age spirituality. There's streams of influence that relate more to conspiracy culture, right? Like conspiracism, like hardcore conspiracism that is very much intertwined with new age spirituality and oftentimes very much intertwined with psychedelia also, right? The human transformation movement, sometimes transhumanism or other kind of like Silicon Valley tech philosophies that also kind of have that orientation towards psychedelia. I mean, nowadays we're kind of like very deep into this accelerationist dark enlightenment. For those of you who are conversional, these are, psychedelics have been a big part of like bringing this forth. I mean, the United States, we're seeing the current government very much aligned with this accelerationist right-wing dark enlightenment Silicon Valley approach. Okay. And amongst many other things that are and have been alternative medicine, right? Like yoga, like, the yoga, the Oriental spiritualities are also very much intertwined with psychedelics and so on and so forth. So healing culture is an umbrella term. And of course, the dominant narratives of modernity that also, of course, influence how we engage and perceive these different cultural components. I mean, we can separate modern psychedelia or modern healing culture as a whole from the dominant narratives of modernity, right? Whether it's neoliberalism or postmodernism, consumerism as kind of like the driving ethos of modernity of, you know, extractive consumerism and so on, all the different things that make kind of like this particular moment in time, whether you want to call it late capitalism or the Anthropocene or whatever, but there's some dominant underlying narratives from which all these other things emerge, and we have to be, aware of how these things interplay. So moving forward, so one of the things that I kind of like always try to point out when we talk about psychedelia, and I mean healing culture in general, but psychedelia in particular, is how oftentimes we approach this healing journey, right? Like, I mean, if we have a healing culture, then we have to have the rationale for a healing culture, which sometimes can be translated to the healing journey, or even, the never-ending healing journey, which again is aligned with the consumerist ethos of modernity, right? So there's this meme, one of the memes that I made a long time ago, kind of like went viral. This one is one that I remade recently, specifically for a conference in England that I went not long ago. Right, but if you look at the meme, you would see like there's all sorts of different things. Some of them absurd, some of them less so. But they're all kind of like have been part of this healing culture in many ways, as whether they're narratives or ideologies or consumer products or things that pop up within the culture, and people tend to follow, and try to kind of like use in different ways for their own personal benefit or the benefit of the collective. Trauma-informed Iceland is stupid, but just kind of like a interplay into how, the overuse and abuse of kind of like the trauma-informed framework. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. The hats, I don't know if you guys seem to have this in Denmark, or perhaps, I mean, you see this in Europe and the festivals all the time, in the US, just everywhere, right? It's kind of like the official uniform of the spiritual woman, like this silly flat-brimmed hats. Oftentimes you can find them with a feather or something else. The parasite cleanse, of course, ivermectin. Okay, we're going to talk about like part of the contemporary healing culture, of course, not only the conspiracism, but also like a very strong reactionary, anti-intellectual, kind of like do your own research vibe. I mean, not necessarily criticizing that per se, but to some extent, we have seen how that reaction of mistrust and lack of trust in institutions is actually kind of like backfiring in many ways as well. Okay, so parasites is just one of the ways, which we will see later when we talk more about root causes. microdosing placebos, going to a conference, and so on. But the point is, there's always going to be something else that is going to be the next thing that is going to there is finally going to fix us. There is going to finally give us that last push into that healing journey. So perhaps one day we will be healed, right? So healed, the wholeness being kind of like the holy grail that we're all aspiring to within this healing culture. So, we're talking about root causes oftentimes because healing culture, like many other aspects of this puzzle, I guess another way of referring to healing culture can be just like the wellness industry as a whole, even though there's subtle differences, but I'm not gonna really get into it. But the wellness industry, which is a multi-billion dollar, euro, dance crown, whatever you wanna, multi-billion industry, even much bigger than what people call big pharma, by the way, in terms of the money that it moves every year. But one of the precepts of healing culture, functional medicine, for example, all sorts of different alternative approaches to health and well-being is this. I just realized that my video is just on the meme. Let's move it right here. So there's this never-ending search for root causes, right? Like this search for root causes is kind of like the hallmark in many ways of the alternative, which is interesting because in modern medicine or evidence-based medicine or biological medicine, we also have root cause discourse. We just call it etiology, right? Which is kind of like just the origin of disease. And modern medicine does deal in full with etiology. We always, doctors, medics, scientists always are trying to provide treatment and diagnosis and prognosis based on etiology of disease. But except there's this narrative, right, that modern medicine only deals with symptoms, except you don't want to actually cure diseases because a client cured is a client lost, and so on and so forth. So this narrative is very, very prominent within healing culture, which is very much emergent from alternative medicine and different ways of understanding health and well-being outside of the main biological allopathic model. So this never-ending quest for root causes, okay, just a little chronology of root causes, right? So we have, for example, this meme, right? Like people, 90% of people in a healing journey give up right before they find the ultimate, like this time for real, though, root cause, which is, again, this is a playful way of kind of like providing a little bit of a critique to this never-ending healing journey. Because there's always going to be some new shiny thing that we haven't tried yet that hasn't really, we haven't really come across, that we're not really fully healed, but maybe the next thing is going to be the thing that actually gets to the full root cause of whatever it is that is ailing us. I'm gonna skip this one. So, we're talking about root causes. We have a chronology more or less of root. I kind of like just, it's a very simplified chronology that I'm just gonna provide you. So we have a little bit of a, succession of history, more or less. It's not complete by any means. There's all sorts of different root cause approaches, but we start with demon possession, going all the way back to religion and spirituality. Somebody has some something is wrong with them, and just go, oh, there's a demon that is haunting them. We do an exorcism or a different ritual to get the demon out, right? Like this is kind of like the oldest explanatory model of disease, the oldest etiology in the book. Somebody gets ill is an act of God, an act of the devil, a demon, so on and so forth. Religion. And then there's a religious or a spiritual act, right, to relieve that person from the influence of that evil spirit, or so on and so forth. And a very, very big gap in history, move towards modern times to chiropractic. If you guys have some experience with chiropractic, in classical chiropractic, the spinal subluxation, right, all disease originates from injury on the spinal cord that can always be fixed through manipulation of the body. We move forward towards repressed emotion, right, like mind-body medicine. If you guys have ever come across Louise Hay, for example, kind of like a very big name in the new age alt-med literature, maybe 20, 30 years ago. Louise Hay kind of came up with this very long list of every possible modern malady that you can imagine, and then linking that up to unprocessed emotions or different life experiences that provide kind of like the background for the physical emergence, right, of something. So, for example, Alzheimer is just the tip of the iceberg, right? In Louis Hay's understanding, right, of disease, there isn't really a clear path to biological causation or any root cause that refers to, the physical body, but rather the root cause, the causative effect of whatever is ailing the person, rests on unprocessed emotional and psychological things. So, for example, Alzheimer would be the tip of the iceberg, whereas the bottom of the iceberg that lies under the water, she would say it's a refusal to deal with the world as it is. Cancer, right? Cancer is the tip of the iceberg, and underneath there's a deep hurt, long-standing resentment, deep secret of grief eating away at the self, right? So these are implications for everything, from of course, from diagnosis to treatment to prognosis, because what would be the logical thing within this framework? Say, well, if you want to really treat cancer, then you got to treat the root cause, and the root cause is emotional. The root cause, for example, if we go to genital herpes, mass belief in sexual guilt and the need for punishment, public shame. So we want the person to first and foremost process shame, right? Like we want the person to work through the shadow of what it is that they've been indoctrinated in terms of sexual guilt and their need for punishment and so on. So the root cause in this framework, right, would be emotional, would be unprocessed emotions, internalized beliefs. And this is something that is extremely widespread today in alternative circles. You will find this everywhere, right? I mean, many of you, I'm sure to some extent at least, maybe not fully, or maybe also, maybe some of you do fully, but at least, within the healing culture, within wellness culture, psychedelic culture, we do have to some extent this sensitivity, right? Sometimes to include emotional and psychological factors, sometimes even going all the way through, like Louis Hay, to imbue those factors with causative effect and causative cause as the origin of the actual disease. We move forward to childhood trauma, for example, which is something that is very popular nowadays. I mean, it was more so maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but still, right? Like childhood trauma has been the rage in the psychedelic community for a very long time, but not only in wellness culture in general too. Psychoanalysis and pop psychology. I don't mean pop psychology in the sense that childhood trauma is not real. I mean, childhood trauma, if you guys have learned or studied works by Gabor Mate or Peter Levine or Bessel van der Kolk, there's some good stuff there. But also, right, when we misinterpret or misuse what it is that is being said, for example, like the body keeps the score, so everything is stored in the body, and every single bad memory or traumatic situation or uncomfortable or awkward event in my life is somewhere stored in my body, and like the genesis and origin of everything wrong in my life right now has to do with my body remembering those things that happened to me when I was 3 or 4. I mean, there's a way that we can like really get lost in this vortex of always trying to dig out the root causes based on the childhood trauma and go through, endless cycles of ceremonies and psychedelic experiences and therapy, sometimes trying to dig out more and more and more and more and more and more childhood trauma and more repressed thing and so on and so forth. Oftentimes really getting stuck into this never-ending cycle that never gets us anywhere, because maybe it just doesn't work just like that. No, the hat, we were talking about the hat, the funny hat. This is a funny meme that also kind of went viral on my Instagram. I don't know in Denmark what would be the appropriate. I mean, I kind of like just made it to reflect the American culture, right? So it's Ashland, or I mean, I'm not American. I just spend a lot of time in the U.S., but Boulder, Colorado, Asheville, North Carolina. And then when I went to England, and somebody told me, hey, like you want to make this culturally specific, then this right thoughtness. UK, I have no idea what Danish. I met Christiana, maybe. I guess not anymore. Maybe that's not. I have no idea. So, moving on. So, I don't know if you guys watched the White Lotus. Really cool show. I loved it. The last season, a little bit less so than the others, but still good. POV, he's telling you that your chronic autoimmune symptoms are due to unresolved childhood trauma. Again, her face, right? Like, maybe a little bit gaslighty, maybe a little bit like unsolicited advice about something that not quite necessarily does resonate. And what this meme is saying, by the way, it's not that childhood trauma cannot be a factor in chronic disease for some people. It may very well be that some people's chronic autoimmune symptoms do
have to or are related to some extent with childhood trauma. I don't know, maybe. Okay, what this meme is referring to is the assertion otherwise that a lot of people expose, right, that every chronic autoimmune symptom has to be related to childhood trauma, because that's what happens when we reduce everything to single root causes. Okay, so I want to make this clear. This is not saying that childhood trauma is bullshit. Well, that would be silly. Or saying that childhood trauma doesn't exist, or that any approach that tries to dig up childhood trauma, is used. No, the whole point of all of this discourse of root causes, maybe there's validity to some of them, some of the time for some people, as factors within more complex etiologies. The point is that when we reduce everything to one single root cause and we use that framework to analyze everything else, then it becomes pretty absurd. And we're gaslighting people for the most part. And I've seen that many, many times in retreat centers, for example, right? When we have facilitators who are very much indoctrinated or married to an idea of a single root cause, such as childhood trauma, and then they use that frame. Abraham Maslow, what did he say? If your only tool is a hammer, then everything is going to look like a nail. Right, but not everything is a nail. And if we only have hammers, then we're going to end up breaking a lot of shit and doing a lot of damage to people who may not need a hammer, right? Uh-oh, worst person you know just learned some therapy words. Very easy to weaponize therapy words to gaslight people, right? Happens all the time. So a chronology of root causes. So we went from demon possession to, sorry, spinal subluxation, repressed emotions, childhood trauma. There's a lot of other ones. I mean, I'm sure you guys can come up with many other root cause approaches that have been popular within your circles or with your scenes. Currently, if you guys are tuned into the Instagram healing culture, or any other form of healing culture, maybe digital, I don't know if in reality this also happens, I imagine yes. But you may have noticed that the current hype cycle when it comes to root causes is parasites. Parasites are everywhere. Everybody's selling parasite detoxes. Every single wellness influencer nowadays has a parasite cleanse protocol. This is the hot thing. And just like we saw before with Lewis Hay, that Alzheimer is due to, I don't even remember what was it, but, every disease was linked to some sort of emotional discomfort. With parasites, it's very simple because there's not so much of a variation anymore. I mean, you can see it here on the graphic. Okay, this is just a random thing that I got from a Facebook or Instagram page, but you will find millions of these graphics basically saying the same thing nowadays. If you have tumors, you have parasites. If you have swollen lymph nodes, you have parasites. IBS, parasites. Fibromyalgia, parasites. Hypothyroidism, parasites. Arthritis, parasites. Eczema, lupus, ADHD, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, you guessed it, parasites. Fatty liver, parasites. If you have a pulse, you have parasites. Basically, the last line gives you everything you need to know. Everybody is suffering from parasites. Parasites are causing everything. And the only thing that you need now to heal, forget about everything else. There's no more childhood trauma. There's no more emotional thing. There's no more spinal subluxation. Parasite cleanse. Okay, so go on Instagram, find your favorite wellness influencer, and buy their parasite cleanse protocol. Amazing. Dr. Saeed Haider. I found him randomly on Twitter. Well, what used to be Twitter, and now it's kind of like a nasty incel shithole. But, he says, it's not a coincidence that microscopic parasites make people gay and gender confused. And Marxist banking parasites make people gay and gender confused too. This is incredible. This is the perfect transition to the next part of our conversation, because here we go from personal individual root causes towards social root causes, right? Like Mr. Hyder here, who, by the way, is not a medical doctor, he's a psychologist. I don't know if he's practicing or not, but as far as I'm aware, through like little research on his credentials, turns out I think he's a psychologist who also sells ivermectin, of course, because we saw parasites. And also, well, of course, he makes the parallel between the microscopic parasites that are making you as an individual ill, but also the Marxist banking parasites. Somebody wants to guess what Marxist banking parasite means? Okay, I can give you the answer later, but if somebody wants to guess, you can guess. But Marxist banking parasites are making you also ill through the social engineering, right? So we come from the body to the social body. Marxist banking parasites, by the way, like everything else in conspiracy culture, most of the time will end up meaning the Jews. FYI. FYI, okay? So we move from the individual body to the collective, root causes in society. Okay, so we have this reductionist approach of singling out a root cause that is causing all of your ills you need to tackle head on from the realm of the individual to the realm of society, okay? And reductionism translated to politics basically is conspiracies and populism and demagoguery. Now, I want to make a little parenthesis because this is the point where I lose many people and people get upset when I talk about conspiracy theories. I am not saying that conspiracies do not exist, okay? I am not saying that powerful people do not conspire behind closed doors for nefarious purposes at all. I mean, this shit happens all the time, okay? What I'm saying is that we don't have to start, twisting ourselves into pretzels to start coming up with like really weird theories about who these powerful men behind closed doors are, mostly a handful of, people with Jewish name for the most part. But rather we can just like look at the world and say like, oh yeah, I mean, we can see actually who is in power. We can see how power colludes behind closed doors for the benefit of the capitalist class, and we can see who ends up paying the price for these things, which is the populace, the working classes, the middle classes, and so on and so forth. So I'm not saying that conspiracy theories are bullshit. I say that conspiracism as an epistemic framework where we make sense of everything that happens in the world through the exclusive frame of conspiracism, through the exclusive frame of always trying to figure out something beyond the mainstream narrative or the official narrative, the institutional narrative, no matter what it is, okay, then that is what conspiracism is a exclusively using an epistemic framework that completely rejects anything and everything that may be, considered to be coming from academia or the institution or science or any official channel because everybody's bought for or colluded with or in the payroll and so on and so forth. So conspiracism, yes, not conspiracy theories, conspiracism. And you may be able to make these distinctions on yourself. We love a conspiracy theory. We love a really good conspiracy theory, but we also know the guy that is fully bought into conspiracism as a whole epistemic framework, who cannot, make sense of anything in the world because every single fucking thing is a conspiracy and nefarious purposes. There's always something, there's always somebody that is being paid, and so on and so forth, okay? So we got that scapegoating historical perspective, which always happens in times of political turmoil, in times of social upheaval, in times of cultural entropy. We always come back to conspiracism. Scapegoating happens. I mean, in America right now is the immigrants, okay? Oftentimes it will be just painting out the globalists or the elites or the international, what was it, the Marxist international parasite bankers, again, the Jews, okay? Conspiracism is oftentimes intertwined with anti-Semitism in all sorts of different twisted ways. In America, this is very big now. I mean, I don't know, you guys, I mean, Denmark, I think you guys are somewhat aware of what is happening in the United States. I think they are trying to steal Greenland from you, right? Very weird moment in history that we live in, people. The Americans are trying to, I guess, buy Greenland or power play themselves into stealing Greenland or some sort of weird shit. So, that's kind of like the MAGA mindset, right? Like the political dimension of all sorts of different things that we see in the micro playing out now in the macro. Okay, this is something that oftentimes we can call the yoga teacher to fascism pipeline. I don't know if you guys have noticed in the United States. I don't know if Denmark really, this is also true. I think maybe it may be. I know in England definitely is, for example. In Spain, which is another place in Europe that I'm more tapped into, it definitely is also. Okay, we have this pipeline, okay, which is basically people who, maybe they were hippies, maybe they were ravers, maybe they went to Boom Festival and did drugs and all sorts. Maybe they went to Thailand or to India, did a yoga training course, and they were all fucking love and light and namaste and bodhisattvas energy and so on and so forth. And suddenly they're right-wing, they're transphobic, they're homophobic, they're anti-Semitic, they're racist, they're, nationalist and ultra-nationalist, and so on and so forth. Mother Ayahuasca told me that Trump is a light worker at the service of the evolution of consciousness. This is not something that I'm making up, by the way. This is something that an actual person told me when I was facilitating an ayahuasca retreat in the jungle some years ago. Okay, there's a lot of that shit happening. Ayahuasca is telling people all the time that Trump is a light worker and that MAGA is a good thing, right? The yoga teacher to MAGA pipeline, right? Like this idea that what the world really needs right now to ascend to the five. I don't know if you guys have been star seeds or this culture of Lemurians and Pleiadians also in Denmark, right? But like this is also like a very, very strong right-wing coup of all this star seed narrative towards kind of like this MAGA Trumpism, right-wing, racist, weird shit. Happening all the time. When an immigrant steals your job, right? Like immigrants in the United States, at least right now, are the enemy, public enemy number one. Big momentum for the anti-immigration thing. I mean, in the immigration, it's a very tricky thing, right? But of course, when you have the yoga practitioners or the retreat facilitators who barely acknowledge the teachers and lineages and people who actually, kind of like allow them to be yogis and to be ayahuasqueros and to burn sage or palo santo and so on and so forth, like buying into this, same kind of like MAGA train wreck. Yeah, funny memes. So, just maybe to wrap up, because I don't want to go over my time allocation too long. Do psychedelics do anything on their own? Like, this is one of the things that I think is very important to ask, because for a very long time, I think many people, we were under the impression that there was a correlation between tripping or doing psychedelics or doing plant medicines and progressive values, for example, right? I said, oh, like, MDMA is this incredible drug that opens us up to empathy. And empathy will entail, I mean, if we're really embodying empathy, then empathy will entail that we will also put that empathy to the test of reality by abiding by the politics that honor and respect empathy, right? So empathy, oftentimes, if we are like really having this awakening of empathy and like, oh, like, yeah, like we're all one, and my brother and my sister, and we're all, whatever, then our politics should reflect that. And I think for a very long time there was this idea, starting in the 60s and the 70s, the summer of love, the hippies, LSD, right? Like peace and love, peace and love. And now we're seeing something that is very different. We're seeing something that is very, very different, which is psychedelics being used, right, in different ways with different narratives, and perhaps not even different narratives, but different cultural frameworks that are deriving in a very right-wing, very conservative mindset in many, many, many instances. And it isn't clear anymore that psychedelics do anything on their own, as we thought, or at least we wanted to hope for a very long time, right? Like now we know that psychedelics are not even plant medicines. I mean, I tell you this because I worked for 5 years facilitating ayahuasca retreats in the rainforest. And I can tell you for sure that drinking a lot of ayahuasca doesn't necessarily make somebody a better person. And in some cases, it makes them worse. I mean, some of the biggest assholes that I ever met in my life are people that have drunk ayahuasca hundreds of times and seem to have learned nothing, nothing of value, at least for sure, right? So again, this is not, the point is like, we are starting to pay much more attention to the fact that maybe psychedelics are not magic bullets that just do something magical to our brains and we become good people. And this is something, for example, why is this picture here? It's a very funny picture for one. I mean, again, like, I don't know how much you guys are attuned to American politics, but, RFK, Make America Healthy Again, like a whole platform and campaign that was run making America healthy again. And the first picture that he got on the plane with Donald Trump, with McDonald's on the table, and his face is just incredible. Actually, we have in my Instagram page, we have this not competition, but I just asked people to kind of caption that picture, and then I had like literally like 700 or 800 responses from people on my page, and it just, you know, we had some really funny ones because this really truly was a very funny picture. But the point is, right? Oftentimes you will hear something like, "Oh, Donald Trump should go into the jungle and drink ayahuasca," or Vladimir Putin should just go and do mushrooms, and then everything will be sorted. And Elon Musk, you know, Elon Musk already is fucked up on ketamine all the time. It doesn't really seem to be doing anything for him other than, you know, just losing value for his companies and being hated by everybody. But the point, I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu is going to just do peyote in the desert and come back to Tel Aviv and like, oh, I repent for all my sins and all the death that I caused, and like bullshit, right? Like these people can drink ayahuasca and eat mushrooms and do everything they want, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're gonna become decent human beings, right? And we know this already to some extent, that psychedelics can actually, in many cases, exacerbate narcissistic personality traits. They can, in some cases, make things much worse if there isn't a good integration, right? I mean, sometimes this is, you know, one of the words that we love to use quite a lot, integration and so on and so forth, but not always really being extremely clear of what that actually means and what that actually entails, right? So no, I mean, I don't think that ayahuasca, giving a bit Netanyahu or Trump ayahuasca or mushrooms is going to solve all the world problems. And in fact, it may make them worse. Again, narratives, discourse, what it is that we're saying when we talk about these things. Different thing. I think I'm gonna stop now just to resume and kind of give you some time to, I mean, these last slides that you can find them in my Instagram page. If that's something you want to do, you can go there and just see them over there, so you don't have to do it right now. But in short, right, like I think it's important to pay attention to the stories that we tell about what psychedelics are, what they can be for. You know, the stories that we tell, how we prime people to experience certain things, the cultural memes that are running in our midst about what these things are for, because these things matter. Okay, the shift is clear. Psychedelics are no longer right in the rubric of exclusively, you know, hippies and psychonauts and progressive values. And I don't know if that's a good thing or not. The point is that that has kind of like escaped from its confinement and is now running rampant. And there's now other competing narratives that are also kind of like becoming very, very popular, very much rooted in libertarianism and neoliberalism and this idea of like the individual and, you know, things that are very much precipitating in many cases a return to some very populist reactionary forms of government. I mean, these things are intertwined. And I think it's important to pay attention how us have a certain amount of responsibility to mind the narratives and the stories that we tell about these things, taking into account that mainstreams are, sorry, psychedelics are no longer a niche thing, right? They're mainstream and going mainstream. They're having a massive impact in politics, in society and culture. And, you know, you as a OG psychonauts, psychedelic facilitators, whatever, you have to grab that wheel on your hands and steer this culture to a direction that is healthy, that is not producing populism, or at least populist regimes, that is not leading us to some techno-fascist accelerationist dystopia. What's happening in the US is going to happen in the UK soon. And, you know, I think there's many places that are at risk, even if you don't think so. I mean, these things accelerate quickly, and psychedelics are a great tool, but also, you know, we need to tell better stories about what they are and how we use them and so on and so forth. I'm gonna stop now. I apologize that this is a recording. I'm sure we could have more conversations about these things, but if you are inspired to do so, you can look me up on Instagram, and then we can continue this. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you all for listening, and have a great rest of your conference symposium.